Jen, I don't think I've ever had such a warm introduction. Thank you so much. That's really, really lovely. And actually, I think we might have somebody to come and say hello just as I start. Bye, Neddy. Whether or not we actually manage to start this, we will find out. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And we are going to be coding the server part of this chatbot. I've been loving following on. Thank you, everybody, for all the great work prepping things. So I'm here ready to go. So I'll start the Nuxt dev server. I've checked out a local branch, which is, let's see, to-start, if you want to follow along. We've got our Morote dev server running. Let's open it in the browser. And hopefully what we are going to have is a social media post generator. Now, our main focus here is going to be not on the UI, but on the back end. And in particular, we're interested in turning this customer support chat from just a beautiful box to one that actually works and does some very, very cool things. So the first thing is that we are going to create this API route. Now, when you start dealing with the Nuxt server, you're going to want to have a folder called server in your project. And this API route is located in there. It's an API route, and it's called AI. And that's what we want. That's how we want to access it, /API/AI. And in particular, in the notes, I noticed that we want to restrict this to just post requests. And out of the box, Nuxt offers a really easy way to do that, which is to add a dot post. You could put any method in there, .get, .options, .patch, whatever you want. So we'll just create that file. Now, this file is going to return a response to any request to that API AI endpoint. So if we create just a basic Nitro endpoint here, and if we were to return some content, then what we should see is if we hit that endpoint, we should get, I need to save the response. I should say this is going to be absolutely very much live coding here. Let's see, I should be able to hit that. Get the response. Why am I not getting a response? Check the browser. And hit API. Yeah, oh, that won't hit anything, will it? Because we need a post request. Just about possible that in setting this up. Yeah, okay, there we go. Right. So what we're going to do is in here.
Quick question for you. Can you zoom in a smidge? Because we're having a hard time seeing it.
Absolutely. Is this good enough? Maybe a bit more?
Yeah, I would. Oh, that one's even better if you can manage that one. If you manage it, that one's probably the best. Thank you.
Okay. We are going to quickly open up the OpenAPI docs. It's always the best way to check what we're going to do. But what you'll find is if you check them out, they offer a couple of different ways of hitting the OpenAPI specification. So in particular, we're going to want to install the OpenAI package. So we might as well install that here, OpenAI. And we'll start the dev server again. We can import OpenAI from that package. And what we get is a client, which is going to be able to make requests for us. In particular, what we want this client to do is provide typings. So you could hit OpenAI, and you get a couple of things from that. You get configuration, and you get the actual API class. So we'll import those specifically. And what the way they want this to work is that you create a configuration object. So we are going to create OpenAI config, and that's going to be a new configuration object. And in particular, I think we're only really going to pass in, going to need to pass in a token. And that is what we care about in terms of our OpenAI access. We can then create a little API client like this. So we could call it OpenAI. And again, we can create a new OpenAI API. I've got to say that's a bit hard to say. And just pass it in our configuration. And then we can then use that to perform all kinds of API requests. Now I'm actually going to do things a little bit differently here. I'm going to create a new folder called utils, and I'm going to stick this boilerplate in there. Because anything you put in this magic folder utils will be auto-imported by throughout your server folder. Will be auto-imported everywhere in your server folder. So in this particular case, we could create this OpenAI helper, and we could actually then directly use it in here without needing to clutter up the handler for us. So for example, what we would be able to do is actually just use OpenAI here directly, if I can spell that correctly, and that would then work for us. I may need to save it first. The access token, though, we do need to provide. Now, Nuxt offers a way of passing in runtime config secrets like this. And this is just a personal preference, but I prefer to nest things in an object syntax. So I might do API token like that. And that feels a little bit more natural to me, but it's totally up to you. And what we can do here is access it with the use runtime config helper. And we can actually just directly pull that in this config.openai.api token. So we get type support for that. And this should actually be all that we need in terms of configuring that API. In our event handler, we can then use it like this. So const data equals await OpenAI.create chat completion. And we might want to pass some stuff in here. So we can pass in a model, which probably we want GPT 3.5 Turbo. And I think this is right. I should probably look at that documentation. There we go. Is that loading? My computer might be just a trifle slow with the screen sharing. Hope it's working for everybody else. So yeah, this is just what we've done here. Basically, we probably want the chat documentation. And what you'll see is the example they give here. I'm just going to grab because it's a little bit faster than configuring things manually. So we'll pass in this model, and we also want to pass in some messages. And that's going to give us our initial response from OpenAI. So if we actually hit this endpoint, let's just return the data, and you can see what's going to happen. So we're going to post to API AI, and oh, it's not authorized. Why is that? Is it possible that I haven't configured the? Everybody look away. Just better check that the set up. I'm gonna have to revoke that immediately after the token. Let's see, that should be working. Let's try that again. I wonder if I change things a little bit with my OpenAI API token. That's right, isn't it? API key. Sorry about that, everyone. You need proof that this is live. This is proof that it's live. Once more. We need to restart it. Let's see. Incidentally, you can, of course, make this request with your own client. You don't have to necessarily use, oh, for goodness sake, API key, OpenAI API key. This should exist, right? We've put this here, OpenAI API key, and it should be, for goodness sake. You can actually just use $fetch, which Nitro provides out of the box as a better way, perhaps, of hitting this endpoint. Let's just confirm that we have access to this here. You need to have an access token. Oh, it's called API key. I don't know why it's completed, but it should be an API key. Great, that's good. Believe it or not, that's good. We want to return specifically the data, so you can see the response that's coming back directly from the API. And so you see we have a couple of options here. We have choices and then some metadata about the response. In this particular case, we want to grab the choices, that's what we're interested in, and just the first choice. OpenAI will give us a couple of options with different priorities, but we probably just want this one. And we probably just want the actual message there, and probably just the message content for what it's worth. So this is what we want to return when someone hits the endpoint. We want to get some kind of response. So it should be like that. We get a text message back. And we want to respond to a message from the user. So we have this chat box component. And the chat box is going to, which you've created, not the chat box, the chat widget. And the chat widget is going to handle everything. So it's going to handle the creation of these different messages. It's going to get a response back. And what we want to be able to do is return the right kind of response. So we're going to need to get access to the message the user has typed. So we can do something like this. Nuxt provides a handler called readBody, which is going to enable reading any incoming response from the endpoint. And so we can pass that message through to OpenAI like this. So if I were to say something like message equals what is your name, then I should get back a response which says something like, I don't have a name, I am an AI model, right? So that's the response. But we can see that it's responding to my question. So that is a way to get some kind of response. Now, when you're dealing with AI, you probably want to give a briefing message to the AI. And so we have this system user, which is going to be able to provide that briefing. So we can say something like, you are a helpful assistant for an AI-powered social media image generator, something like that. And we can respond that. We could say like, what can you help me with? And what I'm expecting to see come back is something related probably to the fact that it's a social media image generator. It's taking a moment to respond. Okay, that's because it took some time, right? So it's saying that it's there to be a helper for the social image media generator. And we can refine this maybe in subsequent moments. But anyway, we're getting a response back. So let's quickly nip over to the chat widget and actually add some handling for this. So this works. We don't just have an empty function here. What we want to do is get a response. So we're going to get a response. We're going to use that $fetch utility I mentioned before. That's a way of hitting our own endpoint. So we're going to fetch from that endpoint. We're going to need to pass some configuration. It's mostly like the native HTTP fetch. So we pass a method, which is going to be post. We're going to pass some data in the body. And in particular, we only want this message key. So we can say message is going to be message.text. That's what we want to pass in. And I think that's going to give us a response. That's going to give us the response that we want. So we can basically, well, we could move this out of there and say text is going to be res dot, what is it? Oh, it's just directly the content. If you want to make it a little more interesting, we could say something. We could actually just return the entire message. So something like this. And then what we actually have got is typed access to that response. You can see that we're getting inference back from API AI. So this should do what we want. We probably want to add a few more things to it in a moment. But let's just pull up our front end and craft a question that will confirm our AI is working. Hey. Okay, well, it's clearly returning a response, and we're seeing something come in to our customer support chat. We can probably now get rid of those default messages here and just make that an empty array, although they were very interesting. And let's see. Yeah, that's come in. It's empty. We can say, hey, and it's returning a response. Probably just, and this will take just a moment, we probably want to add some error handling here. So what we want to do is, let's see, catch. If there's some kind of error, we're probably going to want to do exactly the same thing. And we're going to want to return some kind of response that says something like, there was a problem and I could not come up with a response. Think about how you want to handle the error. Of course, you might want to put a little bit more there. And we can probably move this all the way through to the end and just put that there. Can I format this document? Oh, well, we'll just have to pretend that we've got something that looks a little bit nicer. But there we go. That should handle the error. And okay, seems good to me. But there's a bit of a problem, and that is it's gonna, every time we're sending the same message through to the bot, and actually we want to have some kind of context, so it knows what it's responding to. And we can actually provide that in a couple of different ways. So we could do this, for example. We could capture the messages. We could send them through all the messages every time. We could say we're going to send a list of messages from the other side. But it is probably not the best idea because, well, I mean, it would probably be fine, actually. When we don't really have a risk factor here, other than that somebody could basically interact with our API client just by hitting an endpoint and passing whatever messages they want in. They could pretend to be the system. They could pretend to be the assistant. They could basically take over our model. So we're going to use a built-in Nitro feature that's pretty cool, if I do say so myself. We're going to get access to something called the session. So Nitro has this ability to use a session, which is basically persistent data that persists across requests. So we can configure a session. We'll just put a password in here. Let's see. Oh, I might just need to type some random stuff. See if that works. Okay, so I've created a random password. It doesn't actually really matter what this is, only that it is consistent across requests. And I'm just going to log it out so you can see what the session looks like. So if I hit that endpoint again, you're going to see that we have got, there's a session ID and it's got some data, and you can update that data and clear it as well. So in this particular case, probably the right thing to do is, well, we'll come to that. So let's just pull out the messages. So let's assume we save the messages. So session data messages, or an empty array. And actually, we can actually use this little operator to initialize it at the same time. Well, let's just say, or an empty array, because we're going to have to update it in a moment. We are going to want to add the user message to it. So we'll say messages push this user message, and then we can just drop them in here. And we're probably actually, when we get the response, it's going to be this one, right? We should push that in and save it into our session data. So we can do something again like this, but say it's going to be the assistant who's responding, and we're just going to pop the response in there. And this way, we're going to need to update it. So await session update, and then we'll put the messages in. And that way, we update the session with our new messages. And I'm just going to prove that it works here. So when our messages come in, we're just going to log them out. Okay, let's try this. So I'm expecting this to come in. It's going to log response. It's logging them here. There's nothing to start with. Now, in order to respond, I'm going to have to respond with this cookie, in particular this bit here. So if I then hit that again and I set a cookie to be this, see, I should expect to see. Oops. Yeah. So I'm expecting to see the response. Oh, isn't it working? It's not working because I'm pushing the whole response, but I actually want to hit just the content. Let's try that once more. Okay, so we've got our cookie here. Now I'm going to hit it again, and I'm expecting to see a couple of logs. So we've got the response, what is your name? We've also got this new response, which is the response that sent from the first one. And then we now have our third new question coming back, and so on. So we can basically save the data in a cookie. Which means that we're not having to trust our front end to do it. Now, there is a limitation on this, which we'll quickly come up against, which is that you can only save 4 kilobytes of session data this way. But I wanted to show you that it's possible to do something like that. So if we refresh the page here, we should be able to persist data across requests for this chatbot. So, hi, I'm Daniel. I could say, let me make that a bit bigger. And will come and tell me, ooh, that's huge. Okay, let's save it here. I don't know. What's my name? Your name is Daniel. Okay, great. So it knows a little bit more about me. Now, there would be a couple of other ways we could handle that. We could, for example, use another feature of Nitro called storage. So basically, Nitro allows us to access key value store. Now that key value store can be backed up by any things that you might want. So by default, it's all in memory, but it can also have parts of it that are on the file system, parts of it that are like a Redis store. Vercel announced Vercel KV this week. You can use that with Nitro. There are lots of things like this, but in this particular case, we can use storage by hitting the use storage endpoint. And really what we want to do, we don't want to store all the messages in the cookie because we'll hit this 4 kilobyte endpoint. We only really want to make use of the encrypted ID so that users can't access each other's message history. And so what we should be able to do here is say something like this. We're going to say await storage get item, and we're going to have our session plus messages, we'll call it. And so that can be our new messages. Let's see, and we're going to say this is going to be an array of any. We actually are going to say that this is, can I pass a generic? No. Give the TypeScript. I'm just telling it what it's going to be when it comes back. So what we should have, is an array here. We're passing all of them in. Now, instead of updating the session, what we're going to do is update the storage. So we're going to say storage set item. We're going to have that same key, this one. So we'll pull it out. Const key is that. And we can now set the same key and the same data here. Now we should also be able to persist the information. In this particular case, it's just going to persist it in memory. In production, you might want this to be a little bit different. You might want to say, for example, put this in a reader store connected up to a database or something like that that matches your use case. But actually, memory is not bad. So in this particular case, let's see, we should have what is your name and a response about a language model. And now, assuming we have this cookie, which is a lot shorter, let's just say, would you say that again in Elizabethan English? And we'll pass the cookie here. And hopefully, that cookie is enough for Nitro to look up the data and pull the message history of our response. So we're not passing it back and forth every time. And it's done that, right? So it's looked up, it's found what the message was in the history, it's produced a new response. And now you see that actual cookie hasn't changed here. We should be able to hit that again and basically say something like, without changing the cookie, just say, what was my last question? And hopefully we'll get a response. Were your previous questions, would you say that again in Elizabethan English? Okay, that's pretty cool, right? So we've got sort of persistence of data in our OpenAI endpoint. So if we were going to go to our chat widget, one of the things that we probably want to do is express that persistence, because at the moment, it is going to persist. So let me just refresh the page here. This is a fresh person. I say, my name is Daniel. Okay. Now, what's of course going to happen here is that in the browser, we have now a cookie stored. And this is in storage. We have got this, and every time I send a new request, this cookie is going to be passed. So if I refresh the page and hit it once more, I should be able at this point to say, what is my name? And it knows, because I still have this persistent session with the AI agent. So instead of using a ref, there's actually a very useful utility coming from Vue use, which we happen to have installed in our package.json here, Vue use Nuxt, called use session storage. Actually, we might even want to just use local storage directly, but we could say session storage might be better. And we can actually pull out we can say something like messages, and basically persist our data in this kind of way. So that's all you really need to do. It's going to use our, I have save as type turned on, so it had some invalid syntax there. Let's try this once more. So I should now be able to say, hi, my name is Daniel, and give it a second. And now I can refresh the page again. And I should actually still be able to see that exchange. It should actually be automatically saved using use session storage, and it's just there for me. Now, I might want to do something a little bit like an enhancement here. Might be to show that past chat history and maybe like a grayed out thing, or maybe put a sort of a dashed line under it or something to communicate that actually this is not up to date. This was the last time I visited the site, but now we actually do accurately portray on the front end the fact that there is this history. So even though, again, I've just freshly refreshed the page, there's no data like in the Nuxt app. This is just pulled from session storage. So if we were to look at here in session storage in the browser, we should see this messages property, and we actually have those messages popping up there. So basically now on the front end, we have the messages stored, and on the back end, we have the messages stored, and we don't actually trust the front end to provide us with them or need it. So as this exchange goes on, we're actually storing that in the back end. And we could say something like, what's my name? Of course, it knows it because I've pulled it on a previous occasion, and now it's stored. I think we might also want to handle a few other kinds of things here. So for example, we might want to just not set users typing value to naught. We might want to splice it out. So split out like this. What else might we want to do in this particular case? We might want to, I think that seems fine, right? How about on the back end? I think everything seems to be working okay. I could show you how we could basically do this whole thing with native Nuxt utilities without needing OpenAI at all. You could do something like this. You can actually create pre-configured clients for Nitro. Let's see if we can open up OpenAI documentation again. You could use it. Remember that $fetch utility we used in the front end to make that request? We can actually do the same in the back end, and we could do something like new client is fetch create. So here we could pass in things like the base URL. So the base URL in this particular case is, let's pull this up, is this API openai.com. So we can basically pre-configure that. It needs to have a header, an authorization header here. So we can actually do the same. We could say headers authorization and pass in bearer config.openai.api key. And then what we could do is, instead of use that nice utility, save this out and open our bit here, we could instead say, I'm going to save this line so we don't have to remember it. We could basically say, new client, we're going to hit this v1 chat completions endpoint. And we're going to pass all the same data. And that should just work as well. No, for some reason, it's not, my type hasn't updated yet. It's just my IDE. We should be able to hit the same endpoint and get the same kind of response. What do I need to provide? We wrap all of this in body, of course. So that might be the only change we need to make. Let's see. Nope. We also have to pass the method. And we can do that in our our bit here. So we could say method is going to be post always. And now, choices. For goodness sake, what do we need by way of response? So we have our content type, our authorization, model, messages, v1 chat completions. Let's just have a look at our, because it's no longer nested in a data object. So we should just directly have access to it in the response. Yeah, there we go. So basically here, if you want, we've rebuilt the OpenAI client using fetch.create, which can be quite a powerful tool when you want to pre-configure things and create a minimal response. But honestly, I prefer the OpenAI client right now because it gives us typings. And what we don't want to do is have to re-implement all of that work, although it might be a way for us to pull in the types without having to pull in Axios, which they're using under the hood to make the request. And that is a library that I wouldn't use in any new project at the moment. No shade to Axios, great library, but we have the fetch API now, and that is a superior choice. One thing I think we probably could improve is instead of using $fetch, I did notice that in the project there is this utils here, which happens to have a fetch with timeout kind of thing. And we can actually use that instead. So we could use fetch with timeout at the same endpoint, and it will return us a response, but also time it out for us. Now, Jen, how much time do you think we have? Can I show people one more thing, or would it be good to dive into questions in this book? We probably don't have that much more time, do we?
I muted myself. I feel like we could get away with one more thing. One more thing. Yeah.
Now this is super advanced, and I don't want to scare people away. But basically, this is types. So you'll notice that when I pasted in fetch with timeout, which is pretty cool. Check it out if you haven't looked at the implementation. What it does is basically create an abort controller, which allows canceling a request. And then it basically will actually run this, abort the response if we hit a given, so 15 seconds basically, which is pretty long. That it will cancel the request and then return an error. That's fine. That's great. A fetch, by the way, on its own, incidentally, will retry a request by default, I think three times by default. But one thing you'll notice is that we have lost our auto typed inferred response. And that's because $fetch is able to pull that in from the URL. But here we don't have any of that. So here's how I would solve a problem like that in real life. So we have this advanced type here, and basically fetch is typed like this. It's got these generics and it's got this kind of response. And so we can actually add our own typing to our fetch with timeout like this. So I can paste in the generic types, and I can paste in here the response type and actually say that's what the res is going to be. Now they're not working because they need to be imported. They'll be imported from NitroPack, so we can pull them in there. And these bits up here, the default, they are defined for us up here. So the default is unknown and nitro fetch request, and we can basically just paste those in there. Oh, we need this also. Okay, so we've basically now duplicated the generic types. I think that's right. Oh, we also have to pull in the fact that the URL is going to be, what's the URL going to be? It's going to be R and O. That should be R. This should be O. And and remove the initialization. So now we should have a response. Yes. Complaining to me. Because we declared something else. Okay, so that should be our response. And actually better just to put it at the bottom. There we go. So now we should actually be able to have the same type hinting in our chat widget as we had before. So we know specifically what kind of response we're going to get from our API endpoint, even though we have a custom fetch. Okay, that was the super advanced thing right at the end, just to throw muddy water into the air or something like that. I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed that. That was fun. Jen.
It's always fun when you come on and talk to us about all of this, because it's helpful to see the more advanced things as well as some of the basics. So thank you. Few questions for you let's see which one we want to. What is your favorite REST client?
Ooh, my favorite REST client, if I know, if it's what you're asking, is HTTP. It is great. It's just very simple in terms of being able to make requests in the CLI. So you can just type HTTP post, or just actually hit an endpoint like this. I can just hit the server. It's just very nice. I can see just the headers if I'm interested in them. I hit that all the time. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I probably should have realized that my screen wasn't being shared. HTTP is great.
I caught on. So we're good. All right. So Nuxt is effectively spinning up two servers, one to host your spa and another to host the server API endpoints, correct?
So there is just one server that there's the Nitro server, which both hosts your dev server and the rest of the endpoints. In fact, the Vue part of your app is basically an endpoint, just like any server endpoint. So when you build your Nitro server, there'll be individual endpoints, and then the last one is everything else, basically, that will hit your Vue endpoint. And Nitro Bundle splits them, so only the code you need to respond is loaded into memory. So if you're hitting an API endpoint, it doesn't load the Vue part, it just loads the server endpoint, but it's all wrapped in your Nitro server. It's just the one server.
Very cool. Thank you. All right. Could Nuxt stream the chatbot response much like the actual ChatGPT website?
So we have an open issue on streaming for making streaming responses. The fact is Nitro can do that right now, but I would like to make it more effortless. So one of the things I like about how Nitro endpoints work is you just sort of directly return the response. That's nice. It handles making it a JSON response. It handles the inference for you. I think we can have a similar kind of experience for streamed responses. And that is something that would be nice to implement. But yeah, you can directly return a stream right now, and Nitro will stream back the response as it comes. So we could hook that up to ChatGPT, and maybe I should have done that today. That would have been a good thing to do. I could have shown you.
More ideas for next time. Are there any other Nuxt features that you think would pair well with the AI app? Oh my gosh, API, AI, and AI app. I got caught up.
It's not okay, is it? I mean, basically, all of these it catches me out every time. OpenAI API, and there's also OpenAPI. So I feel this whole thing is confusing. Well, I think there's probably something you would need. I think probably anything that you might need is there in Nuxt, as in the capability is there. Difficult to answer this one. I think it can. Yeah, it really depends.
Okay.
What are you building? What are you imagining? I think there could be something there for you.
I feel like this is the default answer in tech of TBD, to be determined. So many options.
Yeah, totally.
Which package program do you use for the HTTP? It looks super slick.
It is HTTP, which I think I mentioned before, but just I think, what is it? What's the if you haven't checked it out, the URL is, let me just see if I can find it very, very quickly. The URL is we'll just search HTTP IE at the end, HTTP, and it's http.io. I'm sure someone will post it in the chat. It's great.
Yay. Thank you. And just a few more of, do we have access to use Nuxt app composable on the server side? They got an undefined error.
No, you don't. So Nuxt app is a thing that only exists in the Vue part of your app. So it exists on the server side of the Vue part of your, in other words, when you're rendering a server response, an SSR response, you have access to it, but only in the Vue part of your app. It doesn't exist in pure Nitro routes because that it involves a lot of Vue things. That's where it belongs, along with other Vue composables like use cookie. They only really make sense in the Vue part of your app. We have an upcoming DX improvement that should land for 3.5, where actually we are able to tell your IDE that in the server folder, use Nuxt app is not auto-imported and doesn't exist, but in the rest of your app, it does. So hopefully we'll land that. That will be, I think, a nice improvement because your IDE won't be telling you that something is available for you that isn't.
That is always helpful. So good to hear. And last question, why don't we use fetch here?
So my rule of thumb is that use fetch is great for it's great for something like, so there are a couple of things that you would use it for. So one, you would use it for getting data from the server to the client, so you don't have to refetch that data on the client side when your page loads. That's not relevant here because this app is not server rendered. So we have SSR false in the Nuxt config, and basically there's nothing to pass from the server to the client, so we don't need that. It's also useful for things like automatically updating a response when a value changes. So it can watch a source of data and make the new request when that data changes. It's not the pattern here. The response that we're making isn't it's not a reactive based response. Instead, we are clicking a button to make a response. We're invoking that. And so basically, although use fetch could be used here, I don't think it would really offer us any benefits from just directly making the fetch response and handling any error that we get at the other end.
Very cool. Well, great. Go ahead.
I'm saying under the hood, use fetch just uses $fetch to perform the request. So if you don't need any of the extra features it adds, then you might as well just use the underlying utility.
Thank you. Thank you. And anything you think we should have asked you that we didn't?
Oh, goodness me. I want to know, where are the memes? That's what I want to know. I don't feel there are enough memes so far in this Vue.js Forge. And I hope someone will create one with a cat. That's all I'm saying.
I really liked the cat. All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. And yeah, you just set us up perfectly. So thank you.